right, my name is Rich Schmidt. I'm here with Cliff Robben. We're at J. Christopher. It's June 10th, 2021. Thanks so much for joining us today. First question is, why wine?
It kind of started as an accident, to be honest. I started a 2-week job shadow at a CPA firm in Portland that specializes in vineyards and wineries of Oregon. And that 2 weeks turned into 8.5 years. The firm Irvin and Company, that's, like I said, they specialize only in vineyards and wineries. I know they've since grown. I was, like I said, a 2-week job shadow that turned into a full-on internship. And then I really wanted to be in the FBI, so I was studying criminal justice. And wine just seemed really interesting. I fell into it. A couple of really great clients. You know, they had all the big names as clients, you know, Erath, Sokol Blosser. I know I'm skipping over a billion of them, but there were about 200 clients, both vineyard and winery, and when the wine industry was much smaller. And gosh, they sent me out to Lemelson when I was 20 to work a couple of days of harvest. And I mean, that facility was so big and beautiful, and just seeing all this effort during harvest, all the bodies that come together, you know, once a year to bring in, you know, this one product. It's like the Super Bowl of the industry. You know, it's not like beer where you're constantly buying and producing. You get this one shot, and I just thought that was a really great experience.
So let's back up before wine. You mentioned both FBI and accounting, a couple of different paths there. So tell me about where did you grow up and education and kind of the pre-wine path?
So I grew up actually originally from Southeast Portland. Then we moved to Westland, Wilsonville. And when I was in elementary school, I'm 6th generation Oregonian on one side, 5th generation on the other. So deep roots here in Oregon, which is a part of the reason I was super excited to work in the wine industry as well. Just kind of this native Oregonian tree hugging, you know, hippie type. That's what I like about the wine industry. It's so ingrained in agriculture and what Oregon is. FBI, I don't know. I didn't want to be a police officer, and I think given recent events, I made a wise choice not going that route. FBI was just, there's more forensic. I got really into the FBI when, you know, Oregon City, the couple of girls that were, you know, murdered there. I followed that case really intently, and FBI wanting to make a difference and whatnot. It just became a really big interest in my teenage years.
So what did you do after high school?
I went to Portland State, studied criminal justice and accounting, and like I said, when I started at the internship at the accounting firm, just kind of took a hard left, and it was an easy path and an easy career decision to make. I really liked all the clients that we worked with, and the people I worked with at the firm were great, so made things very, very easy. And I had an aunt who's you know, worked in the DA office, and she a few times alluded to how depressing it is to be involved in some of these cases with some of these creepy people. So I'm a positive person. I think that would have been a little bit depressing. I think I figured out early on.
So tell me about your sort of first impression of Oregon wine. Your job shadowing, interning, you sent out into Oregon wine. Tell me about first impressions.
So when I first started, of course I was not of age, so I never dabbled before I was 21. Putting that out there for my daughters in case they see this. I wasn't a huge red wine fan at the time. You know, white wines were more interesting. Chardonnay, really big Chardonnay fan. And you know, I got shown some Rieslings when in my early 20s, and that really kicked a passion for Riesling off for me. I'd say probably in my early to mid 20s is when I really started to get interested in Pinot and kind of understand a little bit. Mostly, just clients and whatnot that would give me bottles, so I figured we might as well open them up and give them a try. I just like the white wines are kind of more preferred, but the having it refrigerated, it's a little cooler. So,
how did you learn about, as you were getting into the wine industry and getting into wine, how did you educate yourself about wine, about different kinds of wines?
Really by drinking. I mean, it's a participation sport. But sharing wine with friends, getting together, everyone's got something that they enjoy and that they want to show. I mean, like, bringing up Forest Shad, we get together and we try all sorts of wines, play a little game called Stump the Chump, those kind of things, blind tasting, so people try and guess what they're doing. Another blind game like Old World, New World, I don't know if you're familiar with that, but you go through the progressions of Old World, New World, country, region, state, wherever, varietal, vintage. So, yeah, like I said, it's more about trying a lot of wines, and some of it is just sometimes you're interested in a country geographically or whatever. You might see what they're doing and, try their wines.
So you talked about the wines. I'm curious about the people in the industry as you were getting to know them. What were your impressions of Oregon wine industry people?
I thought it was really cool just how close-knit a community is. Everyone was so willing to share thoughts and work together to create ideas, solutions. Some of the organizations and groups that are, here in the Valley. Willamette Valley Wineries Association, I think, is great. I remember when it was Yamhill County Wineries Association. But that was the most impressive thing to me, was the cohesiveness of the community.
So after you started at Irvine and Associates, tell me about kind of the progression for you working your way into the industry.
Yeah, so it was interesting. Right around the time I started and they'd sent me off to Lemelson, I was kind of juggling working at Lemelson. I got to play in the cellar a little bit, but I also worked in their office doing various accounting projects. And then, I was kind of just doing really basic stuff at the accounting firm, whatever the grunt work was that no one else wanted to do. And then I thought after 2 weeks I was going to be done, and my last day they said, "Are you going to come back next week?" And I said, "Sure, why not?" So I came back, and they kind of just put me in this little corner, and then finally after a couple of months, they set me up with a real desk. And I felt legit at that point. And then, they just kept piling more and more work. And it was almost easier studying accounting at Portland State to actually have the on-hands experience and then just show up for the exams. Because I was ahead of a lot of my classmates that way. And then, I think one day one of the partners brought up that, if I wanted to continue interning, and I'm like, well, I graduate in like 6 months, and they're like, oh. So they pretty much immediately put me on full-time at that point, before graduation. So it was a little awkward kind of helping, as they're bringing in new people, manage people that were maybe 10 to 15 years older than me. And had fully graduated, but it was fun. I got to work on a lot of audits, a lot of the transactions that happened here in the Valley with some of the big wineries that were purchased. Our neighbors right here, the Jacob Hart, Rex Hill, A to Z transaction. Worked on the Penner Ash transaction, a little bit on the ERATH with Chateau Ste. Michelle. So yeah, a lot of changes, and just, I learned a lot, but I think I was kind of outgrew juggling the massive client load, and it was much easier to come and work directly for one entity.
Before we get to that, I'm curious. We've heard the wine accounting is especially complicated. I'm curious, from your experience, what is complicated about it, and how did you kind of get hold of how it was going to work?
I don't know any different. So for me, I'm like, isn't that hard? Yeah, there's definitely, like any industry, there's nuance to it, but I would say one of the biggest things is, the tracking of the costs, and how do you do that? And some people want to make it overly complicated. You've got your vineyard costs, and then you've got everything going on in the cellar. And, there's also ways to keep things very simple. And, at Irvin, we had everything from very detailed, tracking of costs in the vineyard as well as in the cellar, and other ways that it was very easy to keep it simple, and materially it was still correct. So yeah, like I said, I don't know any other real accounting, real life experience. The one big client that I worked on that was not in the industry, as a computer speaker manufacturer, they were just basically buying from Asia and reselling. So it's pretty easy to track those costs. They are what they are.
As you decided to move out of that role and into this, tell me about the transition for you. What were you looking for, and how did this come about?
Well, so back in 2005, Ernie Lozen and Jay Summers started collaborating just on making some high-end wines. We have this Appassionata label that still exists to today. And what that was there was no real partnership at that point. It was just Ernie and Jay going and finding the best barrels and doing, 100 cases production and of a really nice high-end wine. And they also did this Two Worlds collaboration where Ernie sent some bulk Pinot from Germany, from the Villa Wolf estate that he owns. And they blended some German Pinot with some Oregon Pinot. And, it's a great little value wine for, 15 to 18 bucks a bottle. I had to stop due to trademark issues, but we won't go into that. But so they were doing that, and a couple years into it, they decided that they wanted to do something more. Jay was making 2,500 to 3,000 cases out in West Lynn in a little barn, and so Ernie, was making his money from his Chateau Ste. Michelle partnership, and so he really liked Jay's Pinot style, and so he said, "Hey, let's build a winery. Let's grow the brand, and do a bigger collaboration." And so while Lozen was my first, the import side, Lozen Brothers USA was my first own client while at the accounting firm, I was heavily involved in when they decided to enter into this partnership, I was involved in all the financial planning and the financial model, which we didn't follow for much of the first 7 to 8 years. But so I was heavily involved in that, and, Lozen Brothers was growing. There were still only basically 2 or 3 brands that we were importing. The Dr. Lozen brand, and then Ernie's other brand, Villa Wolf. And then we were just bringing in another German producer, Robert Weil, and they had these grandiose ideas of growing the import business. And then you had Jay Christopher partnership coming on, and I just remember being in a meeting, going over some financial planning, and one of the partners at the firm said, "Yeah, you guys are going to need a financial person on staff." And at that point, I was getting burnt out with public accounting. Public accounting is kind of a burn and churn and burn, whichever. And so, I light kind of went off in my head, and I called up our VP of the import business, Kirk Willie, and just said, "Hey, I got someone for you," and volunteered. And he was like, "Are you sure you want to leave public accounting?" And I was like, "Are you kidding me?" I couldn't have gotten out faster, and it was nothing against the firm by any means. It was just I couldn't keep up with those hours, which is ironic because I work far more now. But yeah, so I came out in end of 2010, and the partnership with Jay and Ernie became official at the start of 2010. So I got to help negotiate the whole buy-in, which was awkward since they technically had been a partnership for almost a year, and we kind of started the partnership without have everything dialed in. That's kind of been the way. Ernie likes to say the plan is there is no plan. So we got rolling with that. I still was focused more on the import business, and I just would be here for the financial aspects, the financials, compliance, bank reporting, negotiating loans. But at that time, Jay was still mostly doing his thing here and running things while we tried to build this facility up and grow the brand. So
we talk about the import business first, since that was kind of where you got started. You mentioned it started fairly small. Tell me how, when you got involved, what your kind of initial role was, and then how it has grown since you've been a part of it.
So when I started the office, we had 3 salespeople. Kirk, who's a marketing and guru, he had his own. Actually worked with Peter Leem. They did this Riesling report together way back in the day, and that's how we actually met Ernie. But I was mostly just a one-man office. I mean, everything that the company needed fell onto me, other than general basic management of the sales team and marketing. That all fell on Kirk. But otherwise, schlepping wine, processing orders, processing billbacks, every bill, dealing with all HR stuff. I mean, everything was literally me, which was great because it was small enough that I could still manage, but I got to see every aspect of the business. And it helped, if I were ever to go off on my own, not that I have plans to, but just the foundation, all these, you get an insight into every piece of the business, which I thought was fun, which was more for me kind of an entertaining thing to do than, when you're at the accounting firm, you're just doing this one specific function or a couple of specific functions, where to basically feel like you are the company is a really cool feeling. I met a lot of people. I'm dealing with distributors and their salespeople. I'm dealing with the other brands that we're considering importing. You're kind of this just focal point of communication. So it's afforded me a lot of cool relationships and opportunities to travel and those sorts of things.
So from that start, what does the import side of the business look like today?
Yeah, so like I said, we were Dr. Lozen and Villa Wolf, and now we just, for a while, we're picking up more German producers. Robert Weil, Maximilian Grunhaus, Fritz Haag, Wittmann. These guys are all iconic brands in Germany. Like the winemakers there have all been named like the winemaker of the year, winery of the year. And so we call it the Friends of Ernie portfolio. And these are all his friends that they see Ernie's success, and they were all already being imported into the U.S. and they're like, it's this just group of friends that we all work together. We play well together. And so that's been fun. But, we've picked up Gantenbein, which is, a very high-end Swiss Pinot producer. Beautiful estate, small and expensive, but the wines are beautiful, and he's very iconic for a Swiss producer. We've picked up Maison Roche de Belen, Domaine de Belen in Beaune, which is the owner, winemaker is Nicolas Potel. And, he had this other label that's still out there with his name that he's no longer associated with. His father was an icon, Clos de la Pousse d'Or. And we've imported Gimberry from Australia. And these are all like very highly respected producers in their regions. And so that's been a fun thing to represent these iconic brands, whether big or small. It's just fun. I mean, if you're going to have a product that you're putting out there, why not work with some of the best, Yeah, so we picked up all these brands. We've gone from two brands when I started to, I didn't need my business card because it lists them all out, but there's, 12, 14 brands that we now import. And, we're in a position that a few times we've been able to say we're not quite ready to take you on because we have to focus on these brands, but they've been some iconic brands too, and it feels good to be wanted.
How has the demand for these wines, you mentioned these are all well-known producers, is there a challenge to find places for these wines in the United States once you import them, or is it fairly easy at that point?
Well, Riesling is not the easiest sell, as I'm sure you're well aware. The whole perception is that it's sweet, which is completely, there are sweet or fruity style Rieslings, but there are a lot of dry wines. And in fact, that's one of the big thing Ernie Lozen is focusing on now, is he's developing, his cellar with a lot of dry, high-end Rieslings. He has some entry levels too that are very nice, but you can go to a tasting and try and offer Riesling to someone and they're like, I don't like it, it's sweet. And I'm like, but you grew up drinking Coca-Cola and you have no problem drinking that. So I don't think people know what sweet is, or there's just some weird conflict there. But yeah, the wines are easy to sell to winos like the Soms and whatnot. They all really appreciate Riesling, whether it's sweet or fruity or dry or somewhere in between. And we often hear from these people that, yeah, these are my favorite wines, but can't get the consumer to try it because of preconceived notions or whatnot. So, Ernie's fighting the fight. He's goes around the world pushing Riesling, and we realize it's kind of one of those things you have to convert one drinker at a time. But we've obviously had some success. Ernie has his big Dr. L brand that, feels like it's everywhere. I feel like I can go in any state and find it pretty easily. And for a lot of our distributors, it's one of the biggest wines they sell, if not the biggest. The other producers, their production is much smaller scale too. So we sell through the wines, but we don't necessarily get a lot of them. Mm-hmm. But yeah, it's definitely it is a challenge to sell Riesling. Some of these other varietals we do, like especially with Ernie's Villa Wolf Estate, it's a value-driven brand where the wines far exceed their price point. So those are easy sales. But there's so much competition right now. Nothing feels easy.
And for you personally, as that side of the import side has grown, what is your role in kind of day to day, month to month, year to year with the importing? What's your role as far as that part goes?
Oh man, I'm still kind of the jack of all trades, where my week this week could look so very different from next week. So that's kind of a hard question to answer. At this point, I can at least get out of the day-to-day stuff of processing orders and those kinds of things, but the most of the day-to-day stuff, if I'm into a daily role, the biggest thing there is just inventory management, especially right now with everything going on. The EU tariffs were not friendly to us, cost us a lot of money. Obviously the pandemic has not been helpful, and so managing inventory is probably the one daily task that I do that's in a very operational piece of the business. I can't tell you how many delays. In 10 and a half years, when we book a container to ship from Europe or wherever, before it even loads, at the time they book it, they give you an ETA, and maybe twice has a container not fallen, within 2 days, give or take, of the ETA they gave us. Now, every container is anywhere from 2 to 10 weeks late this year alone. And that's spanning 350 containers in my 10 and a half years, and 1,300 cases a container. And so, yeah, that's that piece has been a big part of the daily things that I do that I'm involved in daily. But otherwise, tomorrow I'll be dealing with insurance, or I'll be dealing with what we're doing in the cellar here. Between the two roles, it's more just keeping the holes plugged. That's how I feel. So
let's talk about this space. You mentioned you hear from the ground up. So tell me about how it's come about, and again with this part of the business, kind of how you see your role for J. Christopher.
So my role, well, first this property. So we bought this property, or Ernie bought this property in 2009, and we built this winery in 3 phases. So in 2010. We built, for efficiency and sustainability purposes, there are 5 barrel caves down below that were put into the hillside, and there's a little room off that, and that was phase 1 in 2010. And then the following year, we did phase 2, which is there's a red facility that right through here, and then there's the white facility, and then crush pad upper and lower, and we did that in 2011. And that was cool. There are these concrete tilt-up walls where they lay the concrete down on a concrete pad outside, and they've got the forms and all that, and they just come in with a crane, tilt everything up, so it's almost like instant winery, right? And fascinating to watch. It was like Kirk and I came out, and we were like 15 minutes late when they were tipping the walls up, and it's like they'd already had half the walls tipped up, and I'm like, happens that quickly. And then in the tasting room we built in 2017, and it's not the concrete tilt up, obviously, but yeah, so that's how this space came about. And then my role here, I don't know, is really try not to mess things up. Obviously, we've had a few transitions, but Kelly in our tasting room, he's been here. He knows what he's doing. Between the buyout of J, which was a transition over a couple of years, and then we briefly had another winemaker that had been under J, and then now bringing back Tim Malone, who was a good friend, and I'd kind of been like, when are you coming back, for a couple of years, and he wasn't ready to do it. And so now that he's here, he went off, did his own thing, and which was great because he wasn't producing 10,000 cases of wine, but he was producing, 2,500 cases, and he understood all the compliance, and he was a one-man show for his own operation, his own label. So to bring someone in that has that understanding and skill set, I try and stay out of what he's doing, other than, we go and we taste through wines and conceptualize stuff, but he's running the show down there and he does a great job. And so I'm really here to share Ernie's vision and make sure people are following it. I think that's the biggest thing. These guys otherwise don't need me, other than, as a reminder and to sign the checks. I don't want to, I try not to overthink it, but yeah, I mean, every now and then I pop in and probably agitate. Why is he here? So it's easier if I just kind of hide out in my office and make sure the things don't go to tatters, but otherwise it's a pretty well-oiled machine. I think we're more organized than we've ever been. We've got some systems in place that we've never done, and finally, after the financial model that I helped create while at Irvin that we didn't follow, we finally 10 years now are implementing that, and everyone understands what it looks like, and so we're on the path we should be on.
Delayed gratification.
Yeah, it's since I've started working on this project back, in 2008. My first daughter was born in 2008, so it's like, this is my other daughter. So yeah, it's taken a while to get there, but I will say, we've already sold more wine this year through the end of May than we did all of last year. And we took a hit during the pandemic with Oregon wine in general, as well as our winery. But man, I mean, we didn't take a hard hit last year. It's just speaking to the success of what we're doing this year. It's when you actually have a plan and a focus, you can really, really grow.
You talked about sort of being in charge of sort of implementing Ernie's vision. Tell me, how would you describe that vision? What is the vision for this place?
It's ironic that I said that too, because he came through town last week. He hadn't been through in a year and a half, and we had a week of meetings with him, and he kind of took a little bit of a left turn with some of the stuff we're doing. But no, I mean, we have kind of a basic production tier we want to follow. And I talked earlier about this Appassionata label. Like, he wants to grow this as a much bigger brand, and that had never really been, it was supposed to be 500 cases, and it never really got there until the last few years. But, now all of a sudden he wants it to be a 3,000 case brand. And so we're kind of readjusting as we're working through like the 19 Pinots right now. We're kind of readjusting some blends so that we can kind of reconcile and start down this path of this vision he has for this Appassionata label. And the biggest thing about the Appassionata label, for example, is these are wines that we're going to lay down for 10 years before they're even released. So like in 2022, excuse me, we'll be releasing the 2012 Appassionata. And it's only 100 cases, and then the following, there's like 200 cases. But we're releasing these wines when they're 10 years old, which nobody out here intentionally creates a brand to lay the wines down for 10 years before release, which I think, as an accountant, it's an accountant's nightmare. Sell the wine, but it's also very cool. I mean, I think it's great that, we're fortunate that Ernie is patient and he's curious and can afford to do something like that. And, for 100 cases, it's not much, but when he tells me he wants to do it with, 3,000 cases a year, I'm kind of shaking my head a little bit. But no, I'm really excited. And I love Ernie's passion, and he does this in Germany with some of his wines where he's doing Rieslings that he leaves in big foeder casks, for 3 years, and then he puts them in bottle, and they sit for 3 years, and then he releases them. I think the patience and the willing to wait and explore is really cool. And so I'm excited we do that here. I mean, we've always traditionally, at J. Christopher, our wines are all pretty well made the same, 20 months in barrel, we barrel over, and a few months in bottle before releasing. So we're always kind of one of the wineries that is last to release the current vintage. And so, these Ernie's not out there pushing the wine. He wants to be patient. He wants the wines to present well, rather than just rushing to make, $1. So that's the thing I remind people more than anything is patience.
Yeah, I know you mentioned sort of industry organizations earlier. I know you were involved with IPNC for a while. I'm curious how that came to be and what your role was with that. Kirk, our VP, he's been working IPNC in the wine truck for at least 2 decades. And so it's pretty easy for him, there's various inventory sorts we do during the year out at the Abbey. And it was pretty easy for him to be like, hey, you're coming with me. And so, we're sorting wine. And then part of it is that whole team that does that, the wine room, wine truck, we're pretty much the same group that works this every year. We might have a new face or two at times. But it's like this band of brothers. And so, Amy Wesselman, the executive director, and her husband Dave, they became really good friends through that. And, so I was always eager to help when I could with accounting stuff. And so, one day Amy just nominated me for the board since I was already volunteering so much, and which was great. I'm very passionate about it, IPNC, I love it. And then I somehow ended up on the executive board. I don't know how that happened. Probably missed the meeting.
I think so, actually. But which was cool. I mean, it is an honor to serve, and so I'm currently the president of IPNC. This is, given the pandemic, I will have been president for 3 full years before I'm off, which is cool because no one's been president for more than 1 term or a year. So take that, Donald Trump. No, I'm happy to be on the board. Like I said, it's an honor, and I'm looking forward to having another in-person event. It's been rather frustrating navigating how do we fundraise and do events to keep the IPNC brand relevant and known during a pandemic, and everybody has switched to doing such methods and whatnot. So there's a lot of competition. It's really challenging, and we are a non-profit, so it's not like we're flush in cash to begin with. So it's been a challenge, but to be honest, to go through all this and to be so involved in knowing that we're going to come out on the other side feels good to have been part of this, rather than a bystander.
So tell me how the 2020 IPNC went, and with this one upcoming next month, what you're sort of hoping for this year as a stepping stone.
Yeah, so 2020, we didn't really do anything other than we called it the salmon take, and that was held out at Stoller. I considered it a success. It was, at that point, it was kind of a last-minute scramble. The last year was a blur, but I don't think anyone knew what it would look like, what we could do. If nothing else, the volunteers that are there year in, year out, the maitre d's that come to serve, the wine truck, some of the other participants from wineries, like the fact that so many people showed up, it was nice to see how many people really were passionate about it. From that perspective, it kind of gave us hope that IPNC could survive through something catastrophic. This year, we'll see. It's all a virtual thing on a Saturday. it looks like the amount of tickets we set aside, we're about to sell out, which is great. And we had a lot of wineries who have really stepped up to the plate and made donations via wine, money, and other, in-kind donations. So the funds are going to be there to carry us through to an in-person event in 2020, which we're all relieved, but we're all really excited, and we're looking forward to the 2020 IPNC. I think it's going to be one of those things where I think there's a little pressure to make it extra special, because it's like we missed 2 years, it's 3 years between events, and everyone's coming together, and it's like, to me, it's going to be so much more than just about the wine. It's a celebration of coming together again, which IPNC was always kind of that way, but I feel like in 2020 it's really going to be that. And there's a lot of the people, not just the volunteers, but a lot of the customers are the same year in, year out, and it's going to be great to see those people and have them back. And what it means for McMinnville, it's a big draw. I know a lot of people who come to McMinnville during IPNC, they don't even attend IPNC, but there's just so much else going on around it that people come and enjoy it. So I'm really looking forward to, especially for someone who lives in downtown McMinnville, that vibe is so cool.
Yeah, 2022, something to look forward to. So I'm curious, let's talk about 2020 anyway. Let's talk about 2020 a little bit more. Tell me about COVID, sort of initial reaction last spring for you and for your work here, and how J. Christopher and the Loosen Imports sort of made it through the year.
So Loosen Imports, that's an easier one. That was, we obviously on-prem died in a minute. It just dropped off a cliff. Our distributors, especially with the wines that were value driven, like Dr. L, and it's a known commodity, like Villa Wolf, those wines, our distributors did such a great job pivoting and pushing through off-prem. And, the people were just buying what they recognized and value wines. And so that was great. We actually finished, as far as case volume, Loosen, or 2020 was our best year for the import side of the business. It wasn't our best year revenue because, we took a hit to hold pricing with the EU tariffs, 25% tax on everything we brought from Europe. But yeah, it was a very successful year, and what was really cool was to see we can be successful without some of the expenses that we thought were necessary. The amount of travel, my last work trip was end of February, early March last year, and then I didn't travel again for the rest of the year, at least not for business. And the amount of money we were able to save, and the creative ways, that you use social media and other webinars and platforms was really cool. It's actually made my life easier, because every business trip sounds great until you pack up your stuff and you're driving to the airport. I'm like, I don't want to travel. So that was a challenge. But that also is the Loosen Import side for me is more of a virtual thing, as I see it. Like, I can do that job from anywhere. Here, the J. Christopher stuff, it's like I've got my TR employees, and of course the tasting room has to close for a limited, some set of time. And from day one, I was always ultra conservative and cautious about what we did here. I wasn't going to do anything that made them uncomfortable or that they didn't want to do. And they were multiple times expressed gratitude for that approach. It's just not worth. Nobody knew what COVID really looked like, so I wasn't going to put someone else at risk, especially if I wasn't going to be doing it. So closing the doors was tough, but they were also nimble. Like, we were better about putting online offers. We were selling Loosen wines, or wines from the Loosen portfolio. these guys, I mean, the community, the community, the customers that follow J. Christopher and appreciate the brand, they also came out and stepped up and said, I'm going to order and we're going to drive through and you just load it in our trunk. Or these guys were running and selling wine, delivering wine, from Portland to Beaverton. And so I think everyone was just grateful that, one, we all had jobs, and two, that we were all in it together. I felt like it was a cool kind of team experience. Don't get me wrong, I'm ready for things to be completely reopened, but the going through the bad times gets you, you learn a lot, and makes you more appreciative of the good times.
Well, before we talk about good times, I have to ask about harvest of 2020, the other issue from last year. So tell me about the smoke and fires and how they impacted your work here.
No comment. No, it was really sad. Our vineyard here, our estate vineyard, had been struggling for years due to just some mismanagement in the vineyard. And so Ernie sends over Lucas, our vineyard manager from Germany, and he's really kind of brought the vineyard back to life. He came at the end of 2018, and I mean, this guy's a machine. He pruned our entire vineyard in 2019 at the start by himself. There's 21 acres. He did all himself. And so my point is, the vineyard was finally where we wanted last year. It was going to be our biggest harvest yet. The fruit was the best we've seen from the estate, super balanced. And then the wildfires hit, and of course we're right under this Bald Peak Chehalem mountain fire. So we had, police here telling us, you have to leave. They blocked off Hillside. So we weren't allowed, I think it was 4 or 5 days we weren't allowed up here. And, which is, you hear all the panic in the valley about smoke taint, but we're in the direct zone. And so we knew it was bad, but through the connections with Chateau Ste. Michelle, while everyone's sending samples off to labs and they're backed up, we were able to get a couple samples into Chateau Ste. Michelle's lab, and basically is that helped expedite the getting results. But I was here at 8 a.m. We're picking Pinot. We'd already picked some of the whites, but we were picking Pinots, and the numbers came back from Chateau Ste. Michelle on the estate that were so high that, I mean, Bob Bertau, the former head winemaker there, was like, don't pick. And so I walked out and told our vineyard manager to cancel the pick of the Pinot. So, and it's sad. I mean, you'd go out there and you taste the fruit on the vine and you don't notice anything, but that's not how smoke taint works, So that was heartbreaking. I mean, we lease and farm Medici Vineyard down the road here 3 miles, and those smoke taint numbers were, 3 times less what they were here. I mean, vicinity counts, but we're a direct hit where the smoke is just billowing down. And even aside from the Dundee Hills, it was a third as well. So we're moving forward with making some 2020s, and we're actually hopeful about some of them. Our production obviously is going to be much smaller. especially with not picking the estate. I mean, that's 18, 19 acres of Pinot that we picked maybe 15, 20% of. So it's disappointing, but we're like I said, we're still hopeful. There are some really nice barrels. We did. Ernie came through, tasted them. He actually he really likes the wines. Now, of course, smoke taint can present itself later, but we tasted the wines with Bob Berteau when he made appearance through here recently, and he was actually impressed with where some of the wines sit. So I don't think everything's lost, but it's definitely sad. I have friends down the valley that they're not making any red wine this year, and some even just let their entire estate, left it alone, didn't pick, which just shows you how everyone's reaction is to it. I do think maybe that people will have a little bit of regret for not picking and trying at least something. For us, it was a science experience, at least with our estate. Even though the estate numbers, the smoke taint numbers were so high, we figured, like, why not? This is an opportunity to learn. If you don't go forth and make an effort to learn, what are you going to do in the future if this keeps happening, which seems like a distinct possibility. Plus, who doesn't like to experiment and learn? And that's half of the fun in this industry.
So you've had an interesting perspective on the growth of the industry from your work with we mentioned some of the transactions, some of the mergers you've been a part of. What are the biggest changes you've seen in Oregon wine since you've been in it? What does it look like now versus what it looked like when you started, and what do you see for the future?
It's interesting. Obviously working for a foreigner, he wasn't the first. But there is definitely, you do see this influx of foreign investment. It seems like mostly from France. The recent, now you got Bollinger from Champagne here, which I think is cool. I don't know. I think, it's so expensive. France, for example, is so expensive to make wine that it's cool. They're like, hey, let's go try and make similar wines or the same wines, but in a different climate and in an affordable climate for them. So I still expect a lot of outside interest. I think people realize we got something cool going on here. A lot of wineries from California obviously are investing here. I just think it speaks volumes to what we've built here and what the potential still is, and I'm excited to see that continued trend. And what's cool is, for the most part, there still really is this community. Like any industry, there's always going to be your outliers, but it is. I think even this year, the pandemic too has made it real for people where they are willing to be a little bit more collaborative again too. And so I'm hoping that spirit continues. I'm curious to see, I don't know, not necessarily just because climate change, but just because there are people experimenting. I'm kind of curious to see what potential additional varietals we might start to see more of here in the valley. I don't expect a big change, at least not in the short term, but I am curious to see what happens there. The big thing for me though is the amount of brands and labels you see now. I don't remember what my client list looked like when I was at Irvin and Company, but I can tell you there are a lot more licensed wineries now. The fact that I think we're number 2 as far as in the country for actual brands or labels, even at just barely ahead of Washington. I can't believe how much that's grown. I am kind of curious though too. The other side is, so much of what we've been doing in Oregon, it's site specific, like we are here. We're a winery and a vineyard, and now you're starting to see like Portland Wine Company and Division winemaking, and those guys are more in an urban setting, and some of them may own vineyards, some of them are just buying fruit, which is all great. There's room for everybody, I think. But I'm just kind of curious if we're going to see more of that trend, or if it's going to be more where, like I said, site specific, where you're a winery and a vineyard.
You talked about the kind of the possible, probable recurrence of some sort of fire season again. You talked about climate change. I'm curious, as you look ahead for the industry, or even for J. Christopher specifically, what concerns you in the future? Are there things you're worried about that you're looking ahead to and sort of trying to get out in front of?
Yeah, we bought these giant fans that we're stationing around the vineyard perimeter. Come harvest. No. No, that was the thing why we are testing our own wine and exploring what we're doing. It's, if this does become a bigger issue, what are we going to do in the future? How do we keep the wheels in motion and be financially viable? If we can't lose our crop every year. Mm-hmm. And so, we've invested a fair amount of money exploring, ways to mitigate smoke taint, and, none of them are cheap, but we have to figure out something, and the hope is that enough people have to do this, that they're, like anything, once the technology is and the treatments are understood, maybe they become a bit more financially feasible. It seems like a lot of people are working on this topic as we speak, so I'm not suggesting that we'll have a solution as quickly as the COVID vaccination, but I know there's a lot of people concerned about it and working, and so we just kind of, Tim's a research guy too. He loves to look into this stuff, so we're reading up on everything. This group from Northern California wine country, Maverick, they came up and were doing barrel trials, and they, you basically send some barrels to them, they run their trials and do some treatment and send the wine back to you, and you see what you think. Mm-hmm. So there's a lot of those kind of opportunities that we're exploring until we figure out what the solution is long term. But the question I have though is, even if these wildfires, like I said, Bob Berteau mentioned that some of the trials they did at Chateau Ste. Michelle, where people say, smoke taint might present itself later in the bottle. He was telling us with some of the stuff they've done, it doesn't present itself. So there's always the question, are we making a bigger deal out of something that might not be a big deal? And I'm not here for the argument. I'm here to listen to, what the reality is and gain understanding. It's not that I don't think it will be a problem. It's just I'd like to start the conversation. Mm-hmm.
So as you look ahead for your own future, what are you looking forward to? Do you have anything on the horizon you're excited about, and what does the future look like here?
Well, as far as the import business, we're humming along. Like, I'm pleasantly surprised with how well that's doing. The amount of growth we're seeing this year and experiencing has been great. The suspension of the EU tariffs has been rather friendly. It makes the business that much more financially viable, helps with cash flow. And we're not in the midst of doing a whole lot with new brands at the moment, but I suspect we're going to keep growing. And, not being tied to one office space kind of opens up our doors to potentially add more talent, whether it's sales or office. So there's some good opportunity and epiphanies that's kind of come out of the whole pandemic. Mm-hmm. As far as J. Christopher, gosh, Ernie is such a visionary. He's got so many great ideas that he could have a whole new idea tomorrow and it could change the course of the entity. But it wouldn't be so much changing course as it would be an extension or something new, you know. There's a couple of projects that we're excited about that we're just starting to talk about that we're not really ready to talk about publicly, but there's some really cool things on the horizon and opportunities that we're pursuing that I'm pretty excited about, to be totally honest. I don't typically think so much about my future. I'm more of a day-to-day type of person. But some of these ideas that and conversations we've been having with Ernie are things that make me excited, and it is one of those things where I am now, okay, like I want to be a part of this, I want to be around for this. So I'm just planning to be here, planning to just show up, do my thing, be a part of it, enjoy it. So life's too short.
What about outside of wine? Anything else you're looking ahead to in your own life?
Gosh, well, we bought a house in Hawaii. Probably not the best move during a pandemic. It's up on the Hilo side of the Big Island, right up by the volcano. We just closed, 2 months ago. So heading back there in a week, and I'm looking forward to just kind of splitting my time as I can between Oregon wine country and Hawaii. Those are two big things, two loves for me that I really enjoy, and sharing that with my family, my wife and my kids. And other than that, I'm desperate to go get to a real baseball game. I'm trying to squeeze that in the summer. I don't quite know how it fits, but even if I have to just drive down to San Francisco, grab a game, and then come right back. And just the reality of sitting at a bar. I just want to sit at a bar, not just at the restaurant. I want to sit at the bar and actually talk to the bartender. I mean, McMinnville, 3rd Street, there's a couple of spots there that, once a week we just pop in for a drink, even if it's just one quick happy hour drink or at the end of the day. It's nice to just sit there and be able to have the relationship with the bartender. I mean, there's a few in McMinnville that I'd love to see their faces. So it's a little sad to. I didn't think I would miss it, and I didn't for a while. But now I'm ready to sit at the counter and actually be able to interact, rather than having your server or waiters or bartenders kind of look at you like you might be giving them the plague.
It's the littlest things, right?
Yeah, no, it really is. I mean, little Thistle in McMinnville, Patrick, he'd see me outside and he'd already have my cocktail made before I even walked in because he knew what I was going to order. So, and if I wasn't going to order that, I'd drink it anyway since he made it, but it's all good.
So I know you took kind of an interesting path into the industry. If someone were to ask you for advice or words of wisdom on getting into the Oregon wine industry, what would you tell them?
I mean, for myself, I feel like I came into it an easier way than a lot of people. I think, like any industry, but I feel like in this industry, this is not an industry where you're going to make a ton of money without working really hard to progress to where you want to be. So, you have to be prepared to put in your dues. You might have to do some, maybe even volunteer work to try and get your foot in the door, and people want to see your work ethic and know what you want to be. And I think not just for this industry, but for any, know what you want to be and then put your steps in motion. Sometimes I see people who want to be in production and they're just spending their time doing tasting room work, and that is a way you can get in the foot in the door sometimes. But I've seen it several times where people just kind of flounder in the tasting room really, rather than force their way into the cellar work that they maybe want to do or whatnot. So I'd say, yeah, identify what you want to do, and then come up with a path that you want to follow to get there. Working harvest is always seemingly the easiest way to really get your foot in the door one way or another, because one, you build relationships. Those are grueling times, a lot of work, but that's where you can really make it known, like, one, your intentions, your work ethic. So, yeah, harvest is probably the one thing I would say. I mean, friends in the restaurant industry who want to get into wine, especially in the pandemic, this is the perfect year to go work harvest. It's like the restaurants may only be partially staffed or may not need a full staff. Although I know that they're struggling to hire people right now too. So, sorry, restaurants, I didn't mean to tell people to abandon ship. I don't know, sometimes.
All right, that's all the questions that we have
Cool.
for you. Is there anything I didn't ask that I should have? Anything we didn't cover here today that we should have covered?
I'm sure I'll think of something later. I'll be like, oh man. So maybe you can just Photoshop my head and back in and add some voiceover or something. But no, I think that covered a lot.
Good, excellent. Well, thank you so much for your time.
Yeah, no, appreciate it.
Inviting us here for this hospitality and sharing your story with us, and we'll go ahead and let you off the hook.
Cool.